Subscribe to the channel for more stories. My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old, and I need to tell you something that no one else knows. What I'm about to reveal has been eating me alive for months, and I can't keep this secret any longer. Everyone thinks they know my story, but the truth is so much more complicated than anyone could imagine. 3 months ago, I was just another invisible face in the crowd, working as a maid in one of Manhattan's most exclusive penthouses. Nobody looked at me twice. Nobody cared about my dreams, and certainly nobody suspected that beneath my uniform and cleaning supplies, I was hiding a truth that would change everything. The irony is devastating when I think about it now. I spent 4 years in medical school, graduated with honors, and yet, there I was, scrubbing floors for a man who had no idea he was employing someone who could save his life. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened that night still haunts my dreams. I remember walking into Richard Blackwood's penthouse that evening, expecting nothing more than my usual routine of dusting, vacuuming, and pretending to be invisible. Richard Blackwood, you probably know the name, 35 years old, billionaire, tech mogul, the kind of man whose face graces magazine covers and whose every move makes headlines. To the world, he was untouchable, powerful, successful beyond measure. To me, he was just another employer who barely acknowledged my existence. I had been working for him for 8 months, and in all that time, we had exchanged maybe 20 words. Total, he would nod when he saw me, sometimes grunt a greeting, but mostly he treated me like part of the furniture. It didn't bother me. I needed the job, and the pay was good enough to help me survive while I figured out how to resurrect my medical career that had been destroyed by circumstances beyond my control. You see, I had lost everything 2 years earlier when my residency program kicked me out due to a false accusation that ruined my reputation and left me blacklisted from every hospital in the city. But that particular Tuesday evening, everything changed in ways I never could have anticipated. I was in his home office, carefully dusting his awards and certificates, when I heard the most terrifying sound imaginable. It started as a low groan, then escalated into something between a scream and a gasp. My blood ran cold, and every instinct I had developed during my medical training suddenly kicked into overdrive. I dropped my cleaning supplies and ran toward the sound, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. What I found when I burst into his bedroom will forever be burned into my memory. Richard Blackwood, the man who seemed invincible to the rest of the world, was collapsed on his bathroom floor, convulsing violently, foam coming from his mouth, his eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. In that moment, all the months of pretending to be just a simple maid vanished completely. My medical training took over, and I knew exactly what I was looking at. He was having a severe allergic reaction, probably anaphylactic shock, and if I didn't act immediately, he would be dead within minutes. But here's what makes this story so incredibly twisted and painful. As I knelt beside him, checking his pulse and assessing his breathing, I realized that this was my moment of truth. I could reveal who I really was and save his life, risking exposure and all the complications that would follow. Or I could call 911 and hope they arrived in time, maintaining my cover but potentially watching him die. The seconds were ticking by, and his condition was deteriorating rapidly. His lips were turning blue, his breathing was becoming more labored, and I could see his life slipping away right before my eyes. That's when I made the decision that would change both of our lives forever. I looked at this man who had never truly seen me, who had treated me as invisible for months, and I realized that none of that mattered. What mattered was that I had the knowledge and skills to save him, and I couldn't live with myself if I let him die just to protect my secret. So I did something that terrified me more than anything I had ever done before. "Wait, I'm a doctor," I screamed, even though he couldn't hear me. Even though those words felt like they were tearing my throat apart as I said them. But I wasn't saying them for him. I was saying them for myself, reclaiming the identity I had been forced to abandon, embracing the person I truly was beneath all the lies and deception. I immediately began checking his symptoms more systematically, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a simple allergic reaction. The pattern of his symptoms, the specific way his body was responding, suggested something much more sinister. Someone had deliberately triggered this reaction, and they had done it with precision and knowledge of exactly what would happen. My mind raced as I processed the implications, but I couldn't focus on that now. Right now, I had to save his life. and I had maybe 3 minutes before permanent damage set in. I ran to his kitchen, knowing that people with severe allergies often keep emergency medication nearby. My hands shook as I searched through his drawers, his cabinets, anywhere an EpiPen might be hidden. Time was running out, and I could feel panic starting to creep in around the edges of my professional composure. That's when I found it, not just one EpiPen, but a whole emergency kit hidden behind the cereal boxes. Someone had prepared for this exact scenario, which only confirmed my suspicions that this was no accident. Racing back to his side, I administered the epinephrine, positioning him carefully to keep his airway clear, monitoring his vital signs with an intensity that brought back every moment of my medical training. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. I watched his face for any sign of improvement, felt for changes in his pulse, listened to his breathing, all while mentally preparing for the possibility that it might not be enough, that I might lose him despite everything I was doing. But slowly, miraculously, he began to respond. The blue tinge faded from his lips, his breathing became less labored, the convulsions stopped. I had never felt relief like that in my entire life. It was overwhelming, emotional, and completely exhausting, all at once. I sat there on his bathroom floor, still in my maid's uniform, watching this powerful man slowly return to consciousness, and I realized that everything was about to change. There would be no going back to invisible Sarah, no more pretending to be someone I wasn't. When his eyes finally opened and focused on me, the confusion and disorientation were clear. He looked at me like he had never seen me before, which in many ways was true. The woman kneeling beside him wasn't the same person who had been quietly cleaning his house for 8 months. This was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the person I had been forced to bury but had never truly died. "What happened?" he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak, but alive. "Beautifully, wonderfully alive. You had a severe allergic reaction," I told him, and I could hear the tremor in my own voice. "I administered epinephrine, but we need to get you to a hospital immediately. You're not out of danger yet." He stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read: surprise, confusion, and something else that made my heart skip a beat. You know about epinephrine. How do you know about that?" This was the moment I had been dreading and anticipating all at once. The moment when I would have to explain everything, when my carefully constructed new life would come crashing down around me. But looking at him, seeing the life in his eyes that I had helped preserve, I knew I couldn't lie anymore. "Because I'm a doctor," I said simply, and those 4 words felt like jumping off a cliff. "My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and I've been lying to you for 8 months. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as multiple emotions played across his face: shock, confusion, anger, and something that might have been hurt. He tried to sit up, and I automatically reached out to steady him, my medical instincts still in full control. "Don't move too quickly," I warned him. "Your body is still recovering from the reaction. We really need to get you medical attention." But he wasn't listening to my medical advice. He was staring at me with an intensity that made me feel completely exposed, like he was seeing through every lie I had told, every deception I had maintained. "You're a doctor," he repeated slowly, like he was trying to make sense of the words. "You're a doctor, and you've been cleaning my house." "It's complicated," I said, which was the understatement of the century. "But how do you explain 2 years of pain, betrayal, and survival to someone who's just experienced a near-death experience? How do you justify the lies you've told when you're still wearing a maid's uniform and kneeling on his bathroom floor?" He struggled to sit up again, and this time I helped him, my hands steady, despite the emotional storm raging inside me. "We can talk about this later," I insisted. "Right now, I need to make sure you're stable. That reaction was severe, and there could be complications." But Richard Blackwood was nothing if not stubborn, and I was quickly learning that new experiences don't necessarily make someone more compliant. "No," he said firmly, his voice getting stronger. "We're going to talk about this now. You've been in my home for months. You've seen everything. You know everything about my life, and I don't even know who you really are." The accusation in his voice cut deep, but I understood it. From his perspective, I had deceived him completely. I had invaded his privacy under false pretenses, had access to his most personal spaces, had seen him at his most vulnerable moments, all while pretending to be someone entirely different. The violation of trust was enormous, and I had no right to expect forgiveness or understanding. "You're right," I admitted, helping him move to his bedroom where he could lie down properly. I lied to you about everything, but I never meant to hurt you, and I certainly never meant for something like this to happen. Then why? He asked, and the pain in his voice was unmistakable. Why would you do this? Why would a doctor pretend to be a maid? So I told him, sitting there in his bedroom, still shaking from the adrenaline and emotion of the last hour. Told him everything. I told him about my residency at Mount Sinai, about Dr. Patricia Hawthorne, who had falsely accused me of medical malpractice to cover up her own mistakes. I told him about the investigation that cleared me legally but destroyed my reputation, about the doors that closed in my face, about the interviews that ended before they began once my name was Googled. I told him about the student loans that kept accumulating interest while I couldn't find work in my field, about the apartment I lost, about the nights I spent wondering if 4 years of medical school and 2 years of residency were all for nothing. I told him about the employment agency that offered me cleaning jobs because it was the only work I could find that paid enough to survive, about the conscious decision to use my middle name and hide my medical background because people would ask too many questions. I never planned to work for you specifically, I explained, watching his face for any sign of understanding. The agency just assigned me to your account. I thought it would be temporary, just until I could figure out a way back into medicine. But months passed, and I realized I was trapped. I needed the job, but every day I stayed was another day I lived a lie. He listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving my face, and I couldn't tell what he was thinking. When I finished, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. I stood up, knowing that this was probably the end of everything. My job, my stability, possibly my freedom if he decided to press charges for fraud or deception. I should go, I said quietly. I'll understand if you want to call the police or sue me or whatever you need to do. But first, please let me call an ambulance. You still need medical attention. Sit down, he said, and there was something in his voice that made me obey immediately. You saved my life tonight. I did my job, I replied. What I was trained to do. No, he said firmly, you did more than that. You revealed yourself to save someone who had treated you like you were invisible. You risked everything to help me. I could feel tears threatening, and I fought them back. It wasn't a choice. I couldn't watch you die when I had the knowledge to save you. But it was a choice, he insisted. You could have called 911 and maintained your secret. You could have tried to help without revealing who you were. But you didn't. You told me the truth when it mattered most. But what he said next completely shattered me, and I realized that this story was about to take a turn I never could have anticipated. The vulnerability in his eyes, the way he was looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time, told me that everything I thought I knew about Richard Blackwood was about to change as dramatically as everything he thought he knew about me. Sarah, he said, and hearing my real name from his lips felt like coming back to life after months of being dead inside. I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound impossible, but I think someone tried to kill me tonight. The words hit me like a physical blow. All of my medical instincts had been telling me the same thing, but hearing him confirm it made it terrifyingly real. What do you mean? I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. He struggled to sit up straighter, wincing slightly from the lingering effects of the reaction. The symptoms, the timing, the fact that I haven't eaten anything I'm allergic to in years. None of it makes sense unless someone deliberately exposed me to something they knew would trigger a reaction. My mind raced back to what I had observed. The reaction pattern was consistent with shellfish allergy, I said, my medical training automatically analyzing the situation. Severe, fast-acting, potentially fatal. If someone knew about your allergy and had access to your food or drink. Exactly, he said grimly, and the only people who know about my shellfish allergy are family members and very close associates. The list isn't long. The implications were staggering. Someone in his inner circle had tried to murder him, and they had nearly succeeded. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't been who I really was, he would be dead right now. The coincidence was almost too much to believe, except that I had learned long ago that life rarely deals in coincidences. We need to call the police, I said immediately. And we need to get you to a hospital for observation. Anaphylactic shock can have delayed complications, but he shook his head. If we call the police now, whoever did this will know they failed. They'll either try again or disappear completely. I need time to figure out who it was and why. Richard, this isn't a game, I protested. Someone just tried to kill you. You can't just pretend it didn't happen. I'm not pretending anything, he said, and I could see the steel in his eyes that had made him one of the most successful businessmen in the country. But I'm also not going to let them know they failed until I understand what I'm dealing with. That's when he said something that changed everything between us, something that made me realize this wasn't just about attempted murder or hidden identities anymore. This was about trust, about connection, about two people who had been living lies finding truth in each other. I need your help, he said simply. You're a doctor, you saved my life, and you're the only person I can trust right now. Everyone else in my life is a suspect. The weight of what he was asking hit me immediately. He wanted me to help him investigate his own attempted murder, to be his ally in a situation that could get us both killed. But more than that, he was trusting me with his life after I had spent months deceiving him. The irony was almost overwhelming. I don't understand, I said. Why would you trust me? I lied to you for 8 months, because, he said, and his voice was softer now, more vulnerable than I had ever heard it. You saved my life when you had every reason not to. You revealed your biggest secret to help someone who had barely acknowledged your existence. That tells me more about who you really are than 8 months of conversation ever could. I felt something shift inside me, something that had been broken for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to be whole. For 2 years, I had been drowning in shame and self-doubt, convinced that I was somehow less worthy because of what had happened to me. But sitting there, looking into the eyes of a man who had nearly died in my arms, I began to remember who I used to be before the world tried to destroy me. If I help you, I said slowly, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. What happened to me changed me, broke something inside me that I'm still trying to fix. I don't know if I'm strong enough for whatever this is going to require. Then we'll figure it out together, he said. And the certainty in his voice made me want to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to the person I used to be. But what happened next made me realize that this story was about to become infinitely more complicated and dangerous than either of us had imagined. The next morning brought a revelation that made my blood run cold and confirmed our worst fears about what had happened the night before. Richard had barely slept, and neither had I, both of us too wired from adrenaline and the weight of what we were facing to find any real rest. I had stayed at his penthouse, sleeping in the guest room, ready to monitor him for any delayed reactions from the anaphylactic shock. When I checked on him at dawn, I found him in his home office, staring at his computer screen with an expression that made my stomach drop. What is it? I asked, immediately sensing that something was terribly wrong. Security footage, he said grimly, turning the screen so I could see. From the kitchen camera yesterday evening, what I saw on that screen made me understand just how calculated and cold-blooded the attempt on his life had been. The footage showed a woman I didn't recognize entering the kitchen about an hour before Richard's reaction began. She was well-dressed, confident, moving around his kitchen like she belonged there. Most chilling of all, she knew exactly where to find his wine collection and had no hesitation about which bottle to tamper with. Who is she? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. My cousin, Victoria, he said, and the pain in his voice was unmistakable. My father's brother's daughter. She's been like a sister to me my entire life. The betrayal was written across his face, and I felt my heart break for him. Bad enough to discover that someone wanted you dead, but to learn it was family. Someone you loved and trusted was a devastation I couldn't even begin to imagine. I watched as he replayed the footage, studying every detail of Victoria's movements, trying to understand how someone he had cared for his entire life could have tried to murder him. The wine, I said, pieces clicking together in my mind. She knew you would drink wine with dinner. She knew about your shellfish allergy. She knew exactly how to trigger a reaction that would look accidental. She used shellfish extract, he said, pointing to a small vial visible in her hand on the footage. Concentrated, nearly invisible when mixed with red wine, and absolutely lethal for someone with my condition. If you hadn't been there. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both knew he would have died alone in his bathroom, and Victoria would have inherited his entire fortune as his closest living relative. It was a perfect murder, except for one variable she couldn't have accounted for: the presence of a secret doctor disguised as a maid. We have to go to the police now, I insisted. This is evidence of attempted murder. But Richard was already shaking his head. Victoria is smart, dangerous, and she has resources. If we move too quickly, she'll disappear, and we'll never get justice. Besides, this footage alone might not be enough to convict her. A good lawyer could argue she was just visiting, that the shellfish extract could have gotten into the wine accidentally. So what do you want to do? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I wouldn't like his answer. I want to catch her in the act, he said. I want her to try again so we can get irrefutable proof of her intentions. The plan he outlined was terrifying in its simplicity and danger. He wanted to pretend that he didn't remember anything from the night before, that he believed his reaction had been accidental. He would continue his normal routine, including family dinners and social events where Victoria would be present, essentially making himself bait in a trap designed to catch a killer. That's insane, I told him. You're talking about using yourself as bait to catch someone who's already tried to kill you once. What happens if she succeeds next time? She won't succeed, he said with a confidence I didn't share, because you'll be there to stop her. That's when I realized what he was really asking of me. He didn't just want my help investigating Victoria, he wanted me to become his secret bodyguard, his hidden protector, using my medical knowledge to keep him alive while we gathered evidence against someone who had already proven she was willing to commit murder. Richard, I can't do this, I said, panic rising in my chest. I'm not qualified for this kind of thing. I'm a doctor, not a detective or a bodyguard. What if I miss something? What if I can't save you next time? But he moved closer to me then, close enough that I could see the determination burning in his eyes, close enough that I could feel the intensity of his presence. Sarah, you saved my life when trained paramedics might not have been fast enough. You diagnosed attempted murder when the police would have ruled it accidental death. You're exactly what I need. The way he said my name, the trust and faith in his voice, made something inside me respond in a way I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since my life fell apart, someone needed me not just as a doctor, but as the specific person I was. Someone believed in my abilities, trusted my judgment, valued my expertise. But what terrified me wasn't the danger of the situation. It was the way I was beginning to feel about this man who had been a stranger just 24 hours ago. 3 days later, I found myself in a situation I never could have imagined when I first put on that maid's uniform 8 months earlier. I was standing in Richard's walk-in closet, helping him choose an outfit for a family dinner that we both knew might be his last meal if our plan went wrong. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had gone from being invisible to being the most important person in his life, from cleaning his clothes to potentially saving his life again. Are you sure about this? I asked for the 100th time as I watched him button his shirt. We could just disappear, leave the city, start over somewhere else, forget about Victoria and justice and all of it. The suggestion had come out of nowhere, surprising even me with its intensity. But the truth was, these 3 days of planning and preparation had changed something fundamental between us. Working together, trusting each other, depending on each other, it had created an intimacy that went far beyond our strange circumstances. That Richard paused in his dressing and looked at me with an expression that made my heart race. Is that what you want, to run away with me? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that terrified and thrilled me at the same time. Because the honest answer was yes, I would have gone anywhere with this man who had seen through my lies to the person I really was, who trusted me with his life, who made me feel valuable and necessary for the first time in years. I want you to be safe, I said instead, which was true enough without being the complete truth. I'll be safe, he said, stepping closer to me, because you'll be there watching over me. The plan was complex, but necessary. I would resume my role as his maid, for the evening, invisible and unnoticed by his family, while secretly monitoring everything Victoria did. I would be close enough to intervene, if she tried anything, medical enough to counteract any poison or allergen she might use, and trusted enough by Richard to make life or death decisions in split seconds. But as we prepared to leave for his family's estate, Richard did something that completely changed the dynamic between us. He pulled me into his arms, right there in his bedroom, and held me with an intensity that took my breath away. Sarah, he whispered against my hair, I need you to know something before we do this. These 3 days with you have been the most real, most honest days of my life. Whatever happens tonight, I'm grateful that you saved me, not just from Victoria, but from the loneliness I didn't even realize I was living with. The confession broke something open inside me, and I found myself clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had been shifting beneath my feet for years. Richard, I know, he he said softly. I know this is complicated, and dangerous, and probably impossible, but I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. We stood there in that moment, holding each other, and I realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just about catching a killer anymore, it was about two broken people finding wholeness in each other, in the most unlikely circumstances imaginable. But it was also about the very real possibility that we might not survive the night if our plan went wrong. The drive to his family's estate was tense and quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what the evening might bring. I was dressed in my maid's uniform again, but this time it felt like a costume, a disguise I was wearing to protect the man I was falling in love with. The transformation from invisible servant to secret guardian felt surreal and empowering at the same time. When we arrived at the Blackwood family mansion, I was struck by the opulence and grandeur of it all. This was old money, generations of wealth and privilege, and I couldn't help but think about how different my world was from Richard's. But then I remembered that beneath all the luxury and status, we were both just people trying to survive, trying to find meaning, trying to connect with someone who understood us. Victoria was already there when we arrived, and seeing her in person for the first time sent chills down my spine. She was beautiful, elegant, charming, exactly the kind of person you would never suspect of attempted murder. She greeted Richard with a warm hug and what appeared to be genuine concern about his health, asking about his accident with such convincing worry that I almost doubted what we had seen on the security footage. But I was watching her carefully, noting every gesture, every glance, every moment when her attention focused on Richard's food or drink. And what I saw confirmed our worst fears about what kind of person we were dealing with. The dinner party was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and Victoria was the undisputed star performer. I watched from my position near the serving area, supposedly invisible as I helped the other staff, but actually cataloging every move she made, every word she spoke, every moment her hands went near Richard's plate or glass. She was good, better than good. She had everyone at that table convinced she was the loving, concerned cousin worried about Richard's recent health scare. She told stories about their childhood, made jokes that had everyone laughing, and played the perfect family member so convincingly that I found myself questioning whether we had misinterpreted the security footage entirely. But then I caught something that made my blood run cold. When she thought no one was looking, when the conversation had moved on to other topics and attention had shifted away from her, her mask slipped for just a moment. The look she gave Richard was pure hatred, so intense and venomous that it took my breath away. In that split second, I saw the real Victoria, calculating, ruthless, and absolutely committed to seeing him dead. The moment passed so quickly that anyone else would have missed it. But I had been watching for exactly that kind of tell. Richard caught my eye from across the room, and I gave him the slightest nod, confirming what we both now knew. Victoria was definitely going to try again tonight. The opportunity came during dessert service. Victoria volunteered to help bring out the wine, a gesture that seemed thoughtful and generous to everyone else, but made my heart rate spike dangerously. I positioned myself where I could watch both her and Richard, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. That's when I saw her do it. While everyone else was distracted by a story Richard's uncle was telling, Victoria palmed something small from her purse and moved toward the wine glasses. Her movements were so smooth, so practiced, that I realized this wasn't her first attempt at poisoning someone. She had done this before, and she was very, very good at it. I had maybe 30 seconds to act before she succeeded in dosing Richard's wine with whatever lethal substance she was carrying. But I also had to be careful not to blow our cover before we had enough evidence to prove attempted murder. The next few moments would determine whether we caught a killer or became her victims. Moving as quietly and invisibly as I had learned to do over months of maid work, I slipped closer to the dining area, positioning myself where I could intervene, if necessary. But what I saw next made me realize that our plan was about to go horribly wrong in ways we never could have anticipated. Victoria wasn't just carrying one poison, she had an entire arsenal of lethal substances, each one designed to mimic a different type of accidental death. The woman we were dealing with wasn't just a desperate relative trying to claim an inheritance. She was a serial killer who had been perfecting her craft for years, and Richard was just her latest target. The scope of what we had stumbled into hit me like a physical blow. How many people had she killed? How many accidents and natural deaths in the Blackwood family had actually been murdered? And most terrifyingly, how were two people supposed to stop someone who was clearly a professional killer? But Richard was depending on me, trusting me to keep him alive, and I couldn't let fear paralyze me now. I had to think like a doctor, analyze the situation clinically, and find a way to neutralize the threat before Victoria could complete her mission. That's when I noticed something that gave me an idea. Dangerous, desperate, but possibly our only chance to survive the night and expose Victoria for what she really was. The wine she was poisoning wasn't just Richard's in her arrogance and calculation. She had chosen a bottle that would be shared by the entire table, including herself. She was planning a mass poisoning, probably intending to claim that she had been lucky enough to survive while others hadn't, making her the sole heir to the entire Blackwood fortune. But her plan had one fatal flaw. She didn't know that a trained physician was watching her every move and preparing to turn her own weapon against her. What happened next required every ounce of medical knowledge, courage, and desperation the first possessed. I had one chance to save not just Richard, but potentially everyone at that table, and the margin for error was zero. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and people would die while Victoria walked away with millions of dollars and the perfect murder. Moving with the practiced invisibility of months spent as a maid, I approached the wine service area just as Victoria was preparing to distribute the poisoned glasses. But instead of stopping her, I did something that went against every instinct I had. I let her continue, because I had realized that the only way to prove attempted murder was to catch her in the act of actually attempting it. However, I wasn't going to let anyone actually consume the poison. Using a technique I had learned during my residency for handling hazardous materials, I carefully substituted each poisoned glass with clean ones, keeping track of exactly which glasses Victoria had tampered with so we would have evidence later. It was like performing surgery while walking a tightrope. One wrong move would expose me and potentially get everyone killed. The substitution had to be perfect, invisible, and completed before Victoria returned to the dining room. My hands were shaking with adrenaline, but my medical training kept me focused and precise. This was life or death, and I had experienced saving lives under pressure. But Victoria was more observant than I had given her credit for. As she returned to help serve the wine, I saw her eyes narrow slightly as she looked at the glasses. Something had caught her attention, maybe a subtle difference in the wine levels, maybe just an instinct that something wasn't right. For a terrifying moment, I thought she had realized what I had done. Instead, she made a decision that nearly destroyed our entire plan. Rather than serving the wine she thought she had poisoned, she suggested opening a different bottle, claiming that the first one seemed to have been sitting open too long. The family agreed, and suddenly, all of my careful substitution work was meaningless. I watched in horror as Victoria moved toward the wine cabinet to select a new bottle, and I realized she was going to poison the new wine right there in front of everyone, confident that her movements were too subtle to be noticed by people who had no reason to suspect her. That's when Richard made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. I still haven't decided which. He stood up and announced that he wanted to make a toast before the wine was served, drawing everyone's attention to himself and giving me the distraction I needed to act. I want to thank everyone for their concern about my health. Scare the other night, he said, his voice strong and clear. It made me realize how precious life is and how important family is to me. While he spoke, keeping everyone's attention focused on him, I moved into position behind Victoria. She was concentrating on the wine bottle, carefully adding drops of what I now knew was an extremely potent toxin. When I did something that would either save the day or get us both killed, I grabbed her wrist, applying pressure to a specific nerve cluster that would cause her to drop whatever she was holding, a technique I had learned in medical school for disarming agitated patients. The vial of poison fell from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, spreading its deadly contents where no one could accidentally ingest it. The sound of breaking glass interrupted Richard's toast, and suddenly everyone was looking at Victoria and me. For a moment, the room was completely silent as people tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Victoria's face was a mask of shock and rage, while I stood there in my maid's uniform, knowing that our cover was blown but also knowing that we had just prevented multiple murders. "I'm so sorry," Victoria said quickly, her voice perfectly controlled despite what had just happened. "I was just trying to help with the wine service, and I accidentally knocked over this little perfume bottle from my purse." How clumsy of me. But I had seen what was in that vial, and I knew the chemical composition well enough to identify it, even from the smell that was now rising from the broken glass. That's not perfume, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. That's ricin, a deadly poison that would have killed everyone at this table within hours. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I could see the confusion and disbelief on the faces of Richard's family members, the way they looked between Victoria's perfectly composed expression and my obvious agitation. To them, I was just a maid making wild accusations against a beloved family member. That's ridiculous, Victoria said with a laugh that sounded completely genuine. Sarah, isn't it? I think you've been watching too many crime shows. It was just a small bottle of perfume that broke. There's no need to create drama. But Richard was moving now, stepping closer to the broken glass, his phone already in his hand. Actually, Victoria, I think we should have it tested, just to be sure. You wouldn't mind that, would you? The change in Victoria's expression was subtle but unmistakable to someone who had been studying her as carefully as I had. The mask of concerned cousin began to slip, replaced by something calculating and dangerous. She realized that her perfect plan was falling apart, and a cornered killer was the most dangerous kind of person imaginable. Of course not, she said smoothly, though I think you're both being rather paranoid. Richard, are you feeling all right? Perhaps that allergic reaction affected your judgment more than we realized. That's when I made a decision that changed everything. I stepped fully out of my role as the invisible maid and into my identity as Dr. Sarah Mitchell. The allergic reaction that you caused 3 nights ago when you poisoned his wine with shellfish extract, I said clearly, looking directly into her eyes. The same way you were planning to poison everyone tonight. The silence that followed my accusation was deafening, but it was Victoria's reaction that confirmed everything Richard and I had suspected. Instead of the shocked denial or confused questions that an innocent person would have shown, she went completely still, her eyes calculating and cold as she assessed this new threat to her plans. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, but her voice had lost its warmth, becoming flat and emotionless. And I find it very strange that a maid would make such serious accusations against a family member she barely knows. I'm not just a maid, I said, my voice growing stronger. With each word, I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. And I saved Richard's life 3 nights ago when he went into anaphylactic shock from the shellfish extract you put in his wine. We have it all on security footage. The revelation that I was a doctor sent ripples of confusion through the family gathering, but Victoria's reaction was entirely different. Her face went pale, and I saw her hand move slightly toward her purse, where I now suspected she kept more than just cosmetics and perfume. Richard stepped closer to me, presenting a united front. We've been watching you, Victoria. We know what you did, and we know what you were planning to do tonight. The only question now is whether you want to confess or wait for the police to piece it together. That's when Victoria made a choice that proved just how dangerous and desperate she really was. Instead of continuing to deny the accusations or trying to maintain her innocent facade, she smiled a cold, calculating expression that was nothing like the warm family member she had been pretending to be all evening. You know what the funny thing is, she said, her voice now completely different, stripped of all pretense and warmth. I actually liked you better when I thought you were just a maid, Richard. At least then you knew your place. The confession was chilling in its casualness, as if she was discussing the weather rather than admitting to attempted murder. But what happened next made me realize that our confrontation had just escalated from dangerous to potentially deadly. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out what I immediately recognized as a syringe filled with clear liquid. The thing about being prepared, she said conversationally, is that you always have backup plans. This is concentrated insulin. It'll cause immediate hypoglycemic shock and cardiac arrest. Death will look completely natural, especially for someone who just survived one medical emergency. The family members who had been watching our confrontation with confusion and disbelief suddenly understood that they were witnessing something far more serious than a domestic dispute. I heard gasps, saw people reaching for their phones. But Victoria was faster than any of us had anticipated. She lunged toward Richard with the syringe, and everything slowed down to that hyper-aware state I remembered from medical emergencies. I had maybe 2 seconds to react before she injected him with enough insulin to kill him within minutes. And there was no guarantee that even my medical training would be enough to counteract it in time. But I had one advantage Victoria didn't know about. During my residency, I had spent 3 months in the psychiatric ward, learning to disarm patients who were trying to hurt themselves or others. The techniques were burned into my muscle memory, and adrenaline made me faster than I had ever been in my life. I intercepted her attack, grabbing her wrist and applying pressure to the nerve points that would force her to drop the syringe. We crashed into the dining table together, expensive china and crystal shattering around us as we fought for control of a weapon that could kill Richard in minutes. "You don't understand," Victoria snarled as we struggled, her composure completely gone now, revealing the killer she had always been beneath the family facade. "He doesn't deserve any of this. He doesn't deserve the money, the respect, the power. I'm the one who should have inherited everything." The rage and entitlement in her voice were terrifying. But what scared me more was the realization that this wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about years of resentment and jealousy that had festered into something murderous and unstoppable. But I was fighting for more than just Richard's life now. I was fighting for our future together, for the chance to see where this impossible connection between us might lead, for the possibility of healing and love and redemption that I had never expected to find. The fight was brutal and desperate. Nothing like the choreographed violence you see in movies. It was ugly, painful, and terrifying, with both of us knowing that the outcome would determine who lived and who died. Victoria was stronger than she looked, and had the advantage of desperation, but I had medical knowledge of human anatomy, and the motivation of someone fighting to protect the person she loved. We crashed through the dining room, destroying furniture and terrifying the family members who were frantically calling for help. The syringe skittered across the marble floor, both of us scrambling to reach it first. I managed to kick it away just as Victoria's fingers closed around it, sending it spinning under a cabinet where neither of us could retrieve it quickly. "You think you've won?" Victoria gasped, blood running from a cut on her forehead where she had struck the edge of a table. "You think this is over? I've been planning Richard's death for 3 years. I'm not going to let some failed doctor playing dress-up stop me now." The words "failed doctor" hit harder than any physical blow she could have landed. For a moment, all the insecurity and self-doubt I had been fighting came rushing back, threatening to paralyze me when I most needed to be strong. But then, I heard Richard calling my name, and I remembered who I really was, not the broken woman who had lost everything, but Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who saved lives and protected the people she cared about. "I'm not a failed anything," I said, getting to my feet and positioning myself between Victoria and Richard. "I'm the doctor who saved his life, and I'm the woman who's going to stop you from hurting him again." Victoria laughed, a sound completely devoid of sanity or humanity. "You want to know the truth about your precious Richard? He's weak, entitled, and completely useless. Our grandfather built this empire, our fathers expanded it, and Richard just inherited it without earning any of it. I'm the one who deserves to control the Blackwood fortune, not some spoiled prince who can't even protect himself from his own family." The jealousy and resentment were pouring out of her now, years of suppressed hatred finally finding voice. But what chilled me to the bone was the realization that this went beyond sibling rivalry or inheritance disputes. Victoria genuinely believed she was entitled to everything Richard had, including his life if necessary to claim it. "How many people have you killed?" I asked, needing to understand the scope of what we were dealing with. "How many accidents in your family were actually murder?" Her smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Uncle James's heart attack last year, digitalis poisoning that mimicked cardiac arrest perfectly. Cousin Margaret's stroke, carefully induced with the right combination of medications. Even dear old grandmother Blackwood's peaceful death in her sleep. Morphine overdose that looked completely natural for someone her age, with her medical conditions." The casual way she described multiple murders made me realize we weren't just dealing with someone who had snapped under pressure. Victoria was a serial killer who had been systematically eliminating family members to consolidate the inheritance, and she had been getting away with it for years because no one suspected that sweet, caring Victoria could hurt anyone. But the police sirens I could hear approaching in the distance told me that our confrontation was about to take a different turn. Richard's family had called for help, and Victoria's confession had been overheard by multiple witnesses. Her perfect plan was collapsing around her, and a cornered killer with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous predator imaginable. That's when she made one final, desperate attempt to complete her mission. While I was distracted by the sound of approaching sirens, She produced another weapon from somewhere in her clothes, a small knife that she held with the expertise of someone who had used it before. "If I can't have the inheritance," she said, advancing on Richard with the blade raised, "then no one can. I'd rather see it all burn than watch him enjoy what should have been mine." But she had made one crucial mistake. She had turned her back on the trained physician who had been studying her every move, learning her patterns, and preparing for exactly this moment. As she lunged toward Richard with the knife, I applied a sleeper hold I had learned during my psychiatric rotation, cutting off blood flow to her brain just long enough to render her unconscious without causing permanent damage. Victoria collapsed, the knife clattering harmlessly to the floor, just as the police burst through the front door of the mansion. The next few hours passed in a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, and the surreal experience of watching Victoria being arrested for multiple counts of murder, while maintaining her innocent facade right until the moment the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Even then, she kept insisting that she was the victim, that Richard and I had somehow orchestrated everything to frame her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage from Richard's penthouse, the chemical analysis of the broken vial from the dinner party, the testimony of family members who had heard her confession, and most damning of all, the exhumation orders that would soon prove that several natural deaths in the Blackwood family had actually been carefully planned murders. As the police led Victoria away, she looked back at Richard and me with an expression of such pure hatred that it made my blood run cold. "This isn't over," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the mansion's foyer. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've cost me. No idea at all." The threat was clear, but I was too exhausted and emotionally drained to feel afraid anymore. We had survived, we had stopped a serial killer, and we had saved not just Richard's life but potentially the lives of other family members who would have been Victoria's future victims. For the first time in months, I felt like Dr. Sarah Mitchell, again, competent, valuable, and worthy of respect. But it was what happened after the police left that really changed everything between Richard and me. We found ourselves alone in his penthouse at 3 a.m, both of us still wearing clothes stained with wine and blood from our confrontation with Victoria, both of us processing the magnitude of what we had been through together. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been there," Richard said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey with hands that were still slightly shaking from adrenaline. "Not just tonight, but 3 nights ago when Victoria first tried to kill me. If the agency had sent anyone else, if you hadn't been who you really are." "But I was there," I said simply. "And you're alive. That's what matters." He handed me a glass and sat down beside me on his couch, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, could see the exhaustion and relief in his eyes. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. These past few days with you have changed everything for me. Not just because you saved my life, but because you made me remember what it feels like to trust someone completely, to depend on someone, to care about someone more than I care about myself." The confession made my heart race, but it also terrified me. "Richard, I'm not the same person I was before everything fell apart. I'm broken in ways that might never fully heal. I don't know if I'm capable of being what you need." "You're exactly what I need," he said, reaching out to take my hand. "You're brave, intelligent, compassionate, and strong enough to fight for the people you care about. You saved my life twice, solved a series of murders that the police never would have connected, and you did it all while pretending to be someone you're not. If that's what broken looks like, then I'll take broken over perfect any day." That's when I started crying, not the quiet tears of sadness I had shed so many times over the past 2 years, but the overwhelming, cathartic sobs of someone finally releasing years of pain and shame and self-doubt. Richard held me while I cried, and for the first time since my life fell apart, I felt truly safe. "I love you," I whispered against his chest, the words coming out before I could stop them, before I could think about whether it was too soon, or too complicated, or too impossible. "I love you too," he said, and I could hear the truth of it in his voice, could feel it in the way he held me like I was something precious and irreplaceable. But even in that moment of perfect emotional connection, I knew that our story was far from over. Victoria's arrest was just the beginning. There would be trials, media attention, and the complicated process of untangling years of murders and financial manipulation. There would also be the challenge of building a real relationship after everything we had been through, of learning to trust each other outside of life or death situations. Most importantly, There was the question of what came next for me professionally. The events of the past week had proven that I was still a capable physician, that the skills and knowledge I had worked so hard to develop were as sharp as ever. But could I find a way back into medicine after 2 years away? Could I rebuild the career that had been destroyed by lies and accusations?